Over the past several months, I've spent a lot of time understanding the left-leaning bias of our news media. For those of you who do follow the news, this isn't news at all. But as a liberal, I truly wanted to understand what was going on in our culture. I wanted to actually separate the straw from the hay, if you will. In one of the books that I read on this topic, it was called Bad News by Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's currently the editor-in-chief of Newsweek magazine, and this book was published in February of 2021. It was a scathing indictment of our liberal news, specifically the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, all of which I subscribe to and all of which lean left. She gets into granular details specific to how important subscription models are and how important ad revenue is and how these publications cater to a very specific demographic in their pursuit, specifically an elite demographic. Whether that's cultural or financial or both has yet to be determined. I think it's both. Why I found this book so fascinating is that Batya Ungar-Sargon herself leans left. And for me, I always like it when someone criticizes their own family. And in this case, it gave it a little more credibility. I didn't agree with everything she said, but I sure agreed on the subscription and ad revenue models. And as someone who spent the last 20 years in the ad business, I understand those. And because of that, I have friends and relatives all the time that ask me, Joey, where do you go to get truly objective news? Where can I go to actually see a story that isn't bent by the left or the right? And I think that's why today's episode is so exciting for me. I interviewed a woman named Marsha Parker, who is currently the chief operating officer of the largest nonprofit news organization in California called CalMatters. She's also a storied journalist in her own right and media executive. She's also the former associate dean at the Berkeley School of Journalism and someone I like to call a friend. She shares with us why she actually chose to go into nonprofit journalism and why she took the job as the chair of the board of the Institute of the Nonprofit News Organization here in California. I hope you guys enjoy the show as much as I enjoyed the interview. Cheers. Well, there's our legal warning, Marsha. We are being recorded now and you are on camera. So let me first start by thanking you for your time and energy today and kind of helping the audience understand how we know each other. Miss Marsha Parker is the COO of CalMatters and a storied reporter in her own time. And from what I understand, and my introduction was from my old business partner, Alex Gronke, who was a storied journalist in his own right. Was he your student at Berkeley?
He was a student of mine and then became someone I hired when I was running all the Patch local news sites in the West Coast. And so I've known him for a very long time and we love working together. And I know he loves working with you too.
Yes, thank you. He was a wonderful business partner for the last 3 years. And I'm still going to try and get him on the as one of my journalists one of these days, but I can't afford him yet. So we're getting there. So as I mentioned to you briefly, even before we started recording and in some of our emails back and forth, what True 30 is attempting to do is tell the stories with as much research as we possibly can without a partisan lens. And obviously that's very difficult to do. We obviously have perspective, but we think we can get through the stories without bias. And a lot of what's going on today in the zeitgeist specific to media and journalism is that it's liberal leaning, that it's slanted, that it lacks objectivity. And so I thought immediately when this was going on, I called Alex and I said, dude, can you put me in touch with Marsha Parker again? And we hadn't seen each other for about 3 years. We actually came and talked to your journalism class, I think because you were a professor at Northwestern at that point.
Teaching on the campus there. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so we came and talked to a bunch of wonderful kids, both young men and women, I should say, about what's going on in journalism. And so I wanted to get your take as a accomplished and storied journalist, as well as a professor, and then now someone who is the COO of CalMatters, which is a nonprofit news organization in Sacramento. And so why don't you tell me a little bit about CalMatters and why you went there and kind of your mission and what you guys are doing to tell the proper story.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's a passion of mine to talk about the world of nonprofit news and just what's happening in our industry after 20 plus years doing this work. So, I came to CalMatters 5 years ago, just this week. In fact, to really, I've been on the editorial side my entire life. That's what I've always done. And I really came to CalMatters to help build a new, a more sustainable business model for the news organization. And that was really it was very early in the nonprofit news arena. And CalMatters was one of only, I think at that point, there were maybe 4 state news nonprofits in the country. And, they were very well supported by a group of major donors, but they really didn't have kind of a long-term sustainable model with multiple revenue streams, et cetera, which, we can talk about a little bit more later. So, I came to build, help them build a more sustainable model so that they could grow and prosper. That was the whole point. I think that nonprofit news, the other sort of draw for me was I made my entire career on the for-profit news side, and nonprofit news was beginning at that point in time and has grown dramatically since, was beginning to be the new model emerging to save journalism. Now we have, I'm also, my other role is I'm the chair of the board of the Institute for Nonprofit News, which is the umbrella organization. The power and the drive for me to come to CalMatters was to be part of that community, part of a new solution. We're always going to have for-profit media, and we should, but I want philanthropy to support the news and information needs of communities across America and worldwide. So that's why I came, was to help them do that.
That's fantastic. And I noticed in some of your literature here that you guys are growing in leaps and bounds. So you now have approximately 1.8 million visitors a month on your website, and you have member donations, reader donations. And is that where most of your money comes from, is either corporate sponsors or readership donations on the monthly basis?
Not really. So, those are both important revenue streams, both of which are growing. But the other ones, foundations is the biggest group. Then major donors, those are people giving us, $5,000 or more. Then we have all our smaller donors, many of whom, about 30% of our small donors, are also recurring members. So they're giving us money every month, and they're really supporting us for a long time. And then we have institutional money that is supporting our events and all sorts of things that products that we make and things like that. So the only way you can really be sustainable in nonprofit news is to have multiple revenue streams. And those are the 4 that all of us work toward. And for us, now our budget's about $8.6 million this year. So we've grown dramatically. We now have a team of 52. We started with 4 staff people, 40 news partners, because we also distribute our work to now 250 news organizations across the state, in addition to our website, which is our main sort of avenue for sharing our work. So we've just, we've grown tremendously. Now we have 52 people, and that's a lot of change, a lot of growth. And it's been, slow, steady. This is the beginning of our 7th year in business. And I think it's a pretty remarkable story because the growth has been nonstop, which is wonderful. And I think while we still have a long way to go, it's a much more sustainable model than we had 5 years ago. So that's exciting to see.
That is exciting. And even in my research on nonprofit journalism, they actually refer to it as think tank journalism, which I thought was great. And the AP, as an example, is considered nonprofit, isn't it?
They are. They're not. They are. But, the AP has been around for, decades and decades, right? And it's amazing because they're a member organization. So all news organizations are members of AP. And those are mostly for-profits that are members of AP, but they're serving them by, having reporters in different states and helping them get their news out, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. And so I noticed a stat that the Institute of Nonprofit News grew by 25% in 2020. And they said that was a lot to do with COVID and people actually funding more money into the stories that they think or they deem necessary for the public to understand. And did you guys kind of hit that wave as well?
Yeah. So we're now, it's growing very rapidly. So 360 members, they're all, and almost every state in America. There are about 16 of them are state news. We have regional news organizations. We have lots of local news organizations, and we have topical organizations. So they're covering environment. There's a new site that's just started called My News on mental health specifically. That's national. I mean, it's fascinating to see the growth, and there's growth in all of those sectors of our nonprofit news organizations. We think we'll be at 400 really soon, and probably by the end of this year. And we're expecting just year over year growth in the big neighborhood. We just are we do an annual INN index report each year, and we've just all finished putting all the data together and giving it to INN. So now in another few weeks, we'll have our 2021 report done, and we'll be able to kind of share all the growth by sector and all of that. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, now too, I'm looking at some data while I'm talking to you here. Just from a revenue standpoint, now foundations represent about 47% of the revenue that's going to our nonprofit news organizations. Earned revenue from institutional, corporate and institutional partners is about 14%. Individual giving is about 36%. And each of those has grown every single year. So it's extraordinary to see. And while it was a challenging year for nonprofits news, particularly for smaller ones, all of us grew, but financially, it was hard for the smaller news organizations, especially because a lot of foundation money, especially, went to basic needs of human beings, and in our states across our nation, because of COVID and all the terrible impact on people. So a lot of foundations kind of they didn't stop funding nonprofit news, but they focus much of their giving on meeting the basic needs of Americans.
Right. And that actually coincided with some of the for-profit media companies, even the local news organizations that genuinely care about objective news reporting. They lost a lot of the revenue based on the fact that they couldn't get the ad revenue to keep them alive and well, correct?
Yeah. Yes. And that is, that is really the core problem with the for-profit model, right? It's been eroding for years. I mean, we have millions of Americans who need to have their news and information needs met, and we need healthy for-profits and healthy nonprofits in order to serve those needs. There's no question, but it's hard. It's hard because that ad revenue has dried up, especially in print, right? Digital, it's moving back, but it's very difficult for for-profits. There is philanthropic support now going to for-profit news organizations too. It's starting to grow, and I think that's going to be, it's a little bit controversial in the industry. Some people think that why should a for-profit be supported by philanthropy too? But, my personal point of view, which not everyone shares, is that to meet the news and information needs of Americans, and, globally too, we need philanthropy to be part of that solution, part of the revenue stream.
Well, I agree with that too. And I think that part of what you guys did in 2021, and because of what you're doing, and I think because, again, the narrative out there is that journalism is dead and that there's no more objectivity within reporters. And even the guys on our team who are older and have been around a long time, they will point out that the actual industry has changed. There's no question about that. But I think what gets lost in the noise, specifically on media channels in general, it doesn't matter if you're left or right, is that there's tons of really good old school shoe leather reporting journalism going on out there. And even the non-sexy stuff, but which is necessary for us as consumers to understand what's going on in our communities. You guys touched on things like the mental health. You just mentioned that. That's a big piece to what you guys are doing. And you talk about that in your own literature. You have here that it created, you want to talk specifically about the newly created 988 mental health hotline system?
Sure. I can talk about that for a second. So, I think what's important at the kind of high point, the sort of standing above it all for a minute, is this is true for nonprofit news. I mean, we are a public sector or set of news organizations. We think about our work as not just meeting the news and information needs, but really, robust local accountability coverage, right, for our communities. And so it's not that for-profit journalism isn't. It's just that, we don't have to worry about advertising. We don't have to worry about anything else. We're just one goal. So, and for many news organizations, right, the local news needs are very specific, but the themes resonate across our nation right now, right? And not just accountability journalism, but really equity, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Poverty, equity, economic mobility. These are the themes of our nation now, right? And inclusivity. And that includes diversity as well. And that means, for every one of the news organizations, we have to be focused on those themes in our community, whether we're doing regional, state, local, or even topical. So I think that that's an important thing to think about. And I think CalMatters is a good example of that, where our biggest team is our California Divide team, and that team is focused specifically on poverty and inequity and economic mobility, or the lack thereof, in California. So we look across everything that has to be covered in that space, but those are the themes that drive our coverage, and we're framing it on a statewide basis because the state is focused on economic recovery, and we recognize that the divide is the biggest in our state. It's a big nation state, as you know, and it's not going away. The divide is not going to end after, we throw a bunch of money at it. We are throwing a bunch of money at it in California, $300 billion, in fact. But will that money change will it lift more Californians? We don't know yet. That's kind of a big goal. And that theme is happening all over America, right? So that's an important theme. We also look in part because of the pandemic, but and in part because the state is really focused on some of the on health equity, and mental health issues worsened during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And our state, for the first time has a mental health czar, et cetera, et cetera. So, we have a dedicated reporter. Not very many news organizations could do that or would do that, but we have that as part of our 5-person healthcare team. And that's really important to us because we see that coverage in that space is not an area where there's tons of coverage. And we know that we can make a difference in that kind of coverage. So, that's what we do. We see what we're not doing is trying to replicate work that our media partners are doing, right? We're not competing with our media partners. That's why we give all of our work away for free, and CalMatters does, to all of our media partners. It's to find the gaps where we can uniquely fill the space, right, with good reporting.
And so a lot of my listeners are not necessarily up to speed on what journalism really means. So can you do a little bit of your professorship in the sense of explaining what is Alex always talked about being a beat reporter, my partner and your former student, and how much he loved that and how important that was, because it's not a matter of just reporting on a specific news story, but to your point, let's use the DEI piece, because that's a very important piece to a lot of the things that I read on your site. The equity initiatives that you guys are doing, when you talk about that, how many dedicated reporters do you have on that? And what does that actually mean as far as budgets and effort and focus and how all of those people actually do their jobs? Because I think that would be good for the listener to understand.
Sure. I'll speak about CalMatters. I'll also speak about it at the kind of local level too.
Cool.
For us, our California Divide team has, I think we've got 7 reporters and an editor now, and they're across the state. All of our staff is all over the state. They're not all in Sacramento, okay. And they just look at those themes that I articulated and cover that every day in and day out. But they look across all beats because, the economy reporter isn't like, okay, you're on the other side of the wall, you can't write about divide, because she's looking at the economy and the reengineering of the economy. So they speak together, but those big themes have to be covered, right? So people, they frame at the beginning of each year kind of the big themes that they want to focus on within poverty and equity. They also will look at now, because our budget, the $300 billion budget just was released by the governor. And there's huge amounts of money going into aspects of that, whether it's educational equity, whether it's mental health, which is another big area, et cetera, et cetera. So they look at those, and then they're going to really be watching where the budget ends up, because it still has to be passed, right? Yeah. And they're also going to be watching the accountability wise that money, because it's going into something. What comes out of it? Do we have solutions, et cetera, et cetera? Right. So that's an important part of the way that that we work, and that happens on every beat. I would say at CalMatters, and this is very typical of many of our nonprofit news organizations, is at the beginning of every year, the reporters sit down with their editors and they figure out what are the big themes on my beat. What are the big stories I want to tell? And then what are kind of the smaller stories, right? And what stories will resonate across the state? And, how does it sort of tie in with the new focus of the money that's going into the budget? Because that really determines what good things are going to come out of it, and possibly what other things might, turn out not so well because the money's not well spent, it's not delivering, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how everybody does it. I would say that, in California, I think it's very interesting. We have the largest number of nonprofit news organizations in the United States. We have 40 nonprofits. CalMatters is the state one. We're the only one. I think we have 16 nonprofit state house newsrooms like ours in the United States. So we don't have them everywhere yet. So we've got 40, and the rest of those are local. They're all local, and that's fabulous. They're like this, one of the newest ones, San Jose Spotlight, that just started up about a year ago, and Oakland side, Berkeley side, that are really community focused, and that's fantastic. We have older ones like the Voice of San Diego, the Voice of Orange County. Also, all of these are nonprofit news. And, that's all that they do is focus in on the news and information needs of their communities. And, everybody's staffed, some are small, like we've got 52, 36 of those people are journalists on our team. And that's what they're doing every day, right? Is writing about the daily and the bigger picture stories that are really important in their community. And I would say about the DEI, I think what's important to know about that is, it happens in there's the reporting theme around DEI. Then there is the how do you run your editorial operation? A couple of things are happening across all of our news organizations, particularly in the nonprofit space. That is, we're paying close attention to the diversity of our staffs. In California, for example, right? We have our state is 60% people of color. CalMatters is at 50% people of color right now. That's actually, we're trying to map to our state. So we're actually not where we need to be. And we're aware of that. So we're recruiting with that in mind all the time. It's really important. And all of us have that in mind. Like, we want to be representative of the places, whether it's local or state, of what we cover. That's important. And then another thing that almost all of us, all the news organizations are doing, particularly the nonprofits, is we're looking at the diversity of our sources. And we do what's called a content audit. And we look at all our content, and then we figure out, are our sources diverse enough? Do we have 99% of our people are Caucasian that we're talking to?
Right.
And that won't be acceptable if that's what we find. So when CalMatters, we did ours recently, and it told us a lot of really interesting things. And as a result of that, we came up with a whole series of things we're going to do to improve on the diversity of our sources. So we're very conscious of that. And every newsroom can do better in that, and it actually takes intentional focus, right, to do that. So those are kind of like two pieces. The news industry's for decades been really bad at having a diverse newsroom. Mm-hmm. Very few of them have been diverse. And now everybody, we're all working on that, and we're tracking it to make sure that we're making change, right? That it's actually happening. And that's been very true, especially at the very top leadership level of news organizations. Many of them are not diverse. And so that's an area of focus. for for all of us, but it's also the ranks, and it's all ranks, right? Not just editorial. We've got a product team. Make sure every team has to be diverse. It just can't be, oh yeah, we got a few and we're fine. That's not okay. And we've all agreed that's not okay. So we're really focused on that. And the same thing as I say with the content audits. I mean, you have to have a diverse group of sources from which you are drawing your knowledge, right? And informing the public. And that's important. It's not easy, but it has to be intentional in order to make progress.
Well, that's encouraging news, because I think that, number one, you're not only looking at diversity of ethnicity within your organization, you're looking at diversity of sources on the beat. And obviously that comes to, I think, as far as credibility, if you're in a Latino community and you have a Latino reporter, that's going to be more advantageous as far as outreach and understanding specific to the community and the culture and all of those pieces. And then that builds the trust. And is that kind of where the beat, the name itself comes in? These are people, just to reinforce this for the listener, a beat reporter is someone who spends time and effort and love on that specific area. And is that a geographic area, correct?
For us, it's not geographic because we're statewide. So every reporter has to be thinking about their beats statewide, but at the local news organization level, absolutely. There are also regional news organizations that have regional focus. And then there's, nonprofits that are only doing environment, health, mental health, et cetera. And so they're looking most of those are national, some are regional. So I'd say that's the focus really of what they're trying to achieve and what they're required to do. Right. And they have to be responsive to that, because we actually, those are goals CalMatters has for itself. We're going to do X, Y, Z. And so we don't just kind of say it at the beginning of the year, we're actually checking to see if we're making progress. Right. And we have to make progress. We expect to make progress. So it makes a big, a big difference.
Do you see the diversity because you're a professor as well in journalism, do you see diversity in the classrooms today far more than it used to be? Or is it still predominantly, I don't know, middle class? And I don't mean just diversity in the sense of ethnicity, but one of the big talking points around diversity, and Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you know Dr. Jonathan Haidt, but he talks a lot about this specifically. He's big on viewpoint diversity.
Yeah, it's very important.
He's in the social sciences. So just to educate some of the listeners on this, Dr. Jonathan Haidt has a purview that ethnicity and diversity and equity and inclusion is a good thing. But there's also something called viewpoint diversity. So if you come up from, let's just say, the other side of the tracks, and your parents don't have the money to help you get into college,
absolutely,
you have a very different view of the world than someone who comes up, from prep school, goes to Columbia journalism school, and then comes out and gets their first job, at a wonderful publisher, that kind of thing. So is that a piece and part of what you guys do as well? And if so, how do you do that? How do you accomplish that? Because that seems actually even more
question.
difficult.
It's a great question, Joey, and really an important question. So I would say two things. At CalMatters, there's a couple things I think we've done that we've been learning a lot from. One is we have a college journalism network, which we started about 2 years ago. And we made a very conscious effort to make sure that we have a lot of first-gen kids that were engaged not just with the top journalism schools in California, but with other schools. Not that they don't have good programs, but they're not as well known and they're smaller, and they're community colleges, for example, right, where it doesn't have to just be only a great young person who's talented on a major campus in the state. And that has really changed a lot of our journalism. First of all, those kids, we pay them to be fellows, and they are covering the important stories, the same kind of big stories that we are writing about on their campuses. So they're bringing a set of perspectives from their lived experience to us that we wouldn't see. Also, I can absolutely tell you that they have changed our newsroom in ways that we didn't really think about before. First of all, they call us on everything, so I love that. Secondly, and they're not shy at all.
No.
But they also because it's it's a very diverse group of kids, lots of first gen kids, they come with lived experience that some of us have not had. Yeah. So it does inform the journalism. It informs our perspectives on the work that we do. And that's been very, very helpful. I'd say the second thing is, because we're working really hard to build a more diverse newsroom, when we think about diversity, we are also thinking about lived experience that might be different from many others. And, that includes, every kind of diversity that's possible, right? Including diversity of sort of viewpoint, because, most newsrooms are pretty liberal places, unless it's a news organization that was designed to be a conservative voice, right? Right. So we have to think about that, and that includes people. I mean, I think about this a lot. That includes, this happened in many of my own newsrooms where we realize, no one, we don't have any people of faith on the entire team. Like no one, so, no one's in that world. Discussion. So it's, that's lack of diversity in a way too, right? Like you have to have people with lived experiences that are different. It can't have everybody the same. Yeah. So, it's like a lot of things, like not just where do people come from, or where have they lived, right? Like you can bring all sorts of diversity of experience to the newsroom. And so, I think we're getting better at doing that. We still got a long ways to go, but we're very conscious of that. And we're actually thinking about it as we interview people, as we, because CalMatters seems to constantly be hiring. I do a lot of outreach with diversity in mind. And when I say that, it isn't just people of color, although that's an important focus for us. It's also these kind of different lived experiences that they're going to bring some different kind of perspective that we don't really have on our team.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually something that's one of the few things that the left and the right can agree on, is that diversity itself isn't just color. It has to do with socioeconomics, has to do with lived experience. And if you're going to, hire a reporter who is actually trans versus someone who reads about being trans, there's a very big difference there in how that story is going to be shared and or reported. And then the same thing stands true with socioeconomics. If someone grew up poor versus someone who came out of prep school, there's a very different lens on how you see
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
That's cool that you guys are addressing all that, because again, that's one of the things that I read about, and that's a big bell they keep ringing, they being the people that are criticizing journalism.
Yeah.
That, and do you think that this is more akin to nonprofits as opposed to like the big publishers, the Atlantic and the Times and the Washington Post and, the biggest and most respected organizations? And to your point, they admit that they lean liberal. That's not, no one of reason argues that. Do you think it is more akin to the nonprofits?
I mean, I don't know if it's more akin. I mean, I think what's happened in our nation in the last 2 years, in addition to the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, everything that's changed our conversation in America has made all of us in newsrooms, for-profit and nonprofit, think better, and really contemplate our lack of diversity in our newsrooms, which the industry has been guilty of I've been in this industry a long time, decades. We used to, they still do release the diversity data in the industry. That was mostly the for-profits because there weren't that many nonprofits then.
Right.
It was abysmal for years and years and years. So it's not like we have like a long way to go. So I think that nonprofits, though, in part because it's kind of a bedrock principle of the Institute for Nonprofit News, is that we are going to help our nonprofit news organizations be more diverse in every way, and that we actually have a talent pipeline geared that way. We have an emerging leaders geared that way. So, we're doing things to actually help us create the pipeline and help that happen. That is not to say that, all the nonprofit news organizations are like great on diversity, because it's not true. But we're making a lot of progress, and we're tracking it to see, right? And we're putting resources into developing the talent pipeline that will make that happen more easily too.
That's great. How do you specifically, like, you mentioned the college students. When you have them as part of the organization in the journalism schools, do they write about their college, or do they write about their local area as well? Or what does that look like as far as the stories? And then do they actually get bylines in CalMatters?
They sure do. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we pay them to report from their campuses. But again, their work is tied in with the themes that we have in our organization, right? So
Yeah.
they're covering, like during the pandemic, we had we just kind of had the pandemic on California campuses, and they just dug into what they were seeing. That had to do with, we did some remarkable stories about students living in their cars because they couldn't any longer. First, the dorms were closed, right? So then they weren't there. A million reasons why homelessness among students rose during the pandemic. Hunger. I mean, it was extraordinary and startling and very sad, right, to see hunger growing on campuses. We wrote about students being forced to drop out to go to work because their parents were losing jobs. I mean, these kids, that lived experience, right?
Yep.
It's their friends, their colleagues, right? They see it and they report on it. And yes, they all get bylines. They all get paid. I mean, that's how we do it. They're not really writing local, but they're writing from their local campuses, and it's part of the college beat that is, it's on our site.
Right. And that's all over California then?
Yes. They're all over
different counties.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And we're trying to grow it. We've got about 30 campuses participating, and, the kids have been amazing. And we also help them, sometimes they're like juniors or whatever, but if they're going to look for jobs, sometimes we can hire them if we have enough open slots at that point, but we help them get jobs too. So that talent pipeline is, a formal talent pipeline that we have, and we help them get into jobs within California if they want, or even elsewhere, because we got the connections to be able to do that.
That's fabulous. And so that does cut across everything we just talked about, just to be clear. Just to use examples of diversity, you'd have some trans, you could have people of color, you could have socioeconomics, you could have culture, you could have ethnicity, you could all those things you guys look for as an organization because of the lived purpose. It makes the articles better. It makes the newspaper, it makes the organization better. And to your point, the one thing I do know about the young men and women that I come up against in any of our reporting, they're very vocal, very passionate, and they're very informed. So like if you're gonna debate, a millennial, and it's too broad of a term. I had a wonderful chat with this young man named Britt Abney, and it's one of my podcasts. And we talked about everything from Jordan Peterson to trans people and the best way to go about that. And he said something to me that was so astute. He said, the hard part about it is the mob out there, they may get a bad vibe, but when you actually talk to someone individually, there's no such thing. It's just human to human. Everything is easier. And that's where the real stories take place. So if you have someone that's actually out there interviewing about something they have passion for, whether it's a person of color, whether it's someone who's trans, whether it's someone who's gay, whether any of those pieces, that's where I think the best storytelling emanates. Because to your point, it is lived purpose, lived experience. They actually have a purview that I, as a 55-year-old white male, would not have, right? I'm too far removed from a lot of it. Yeah. That's
informs everybody. And it informs our whole team. We talk about this as a team all the time. It's not just CalMatters doing this, but it's just, I don't, there are other organizations, like we partner with another nonprofit news organization called Open Campus, which is all about higher ed, and our college journalism, we do projects with them, et cetera. So that gives them national exposure too. So, we do that with them. We do it with KQED, all sorts of different partners. And the idea is give them more experience, but that lived experience then informs, a broader set of coverage beyond just CalMatters, which is great. And we really, our goal is to keep growing the college journalism network.
I think that's fabulous. I mean, and again, that goes against a lot of the stuff that I've been reading in mainstream news, if you will. It's that internships are free and, they don't pay them, and they're coming from the best schools, and a lot of those kids. So that I'll get into that in a little while. But one of the partners, is it Media and Color is one of your partners?
Media and Color, and another one called Latino Media Collaborative, which are really two great, organizations here in California. And so one of the important things that we do is work with organizations like them. And the reason we do that is, again, CalMatters looks at our role as two roles. One is to inform Californians, and the second one is to support the media ecosystem so it can be stronger. And that includes for-profit and nonprofit, where we don't have a point of view that one's better than the other. We want everyone's news and information needs to be met, and we want to do our part to support that. So Media in Color is really fantastic. They are an organization that is really devoted to working with ethnic media, Black and ethnic media news organizations in California to help them build their organizational capacity. So it's leadership, training, and sustainability. So they focus on all sorts of work in the space to help them begin to have multiple revenue streams, a website that can support advertising, et cetera, et cetera, all the things that really are needed to help them be sustainable. And, we started doing this work with them, and we are not the major player in this. Those two organizations are. It's just because we have all the media partners, we work together with them to do this. So we help raise money that goes to them so that they can do this work. So it really kind of kicked up during the pandemic because Black and ethnic media publishers were struggling unbelievably during that time. So that was really why we started really working so closely with them. So they have one core piece, and then the second core piece is this Latino Media Collaborative. And what they are doing is they're working to really develop two things. One is kind of a set of sort of community roundtables that really allow all of them to form a community, a set of bonds, understanding. They also do training for all of them, but it's also to build community. And then the second part is to kind of grab hold of this huge pot of money going into equity in California from foundations, from institutions, et cetera. And instead of them only kind of dispersing those in small grants to one ethnic media organization, one here, one there. What they do is they go to these big organizations and say, put your 50 million into all of them, right? So your ad campaigns are not going to be one-offs anymore. They're going to help them build a sustainable model. And you have we can give you the entree to all of them at the same time. So those campaigns can run with all of them, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's part of building sustainability, but it's also the power of, in California, we have a large number of Latino owned and operated news organizations, and they've never kind of had that power of all of them being able to get that kind of grab that pile of money and have it really be work with everyone, right? And help them become more sustainable. So, and also build this real community among that group of Black and all ethnic media, Black, Asian, and Latino primarily, because those are the primary groups that are owning these news organizations and operating them. And they need more support. Those are the news organizations supporting many communities of color without enough sustainability behind them, and they need that.
That's good. I think because there's a couple questions I have in my head that just popped up. One of which is the digital divide, specific to ethnic communities.
Yeah,
a lot of folks don't have access to Wi-Fi and computers and things like that. So I think the original idea of journalism and the importance of it, from the early republic, right? The U.S. Postal Service back in the day actually subsidized sending out the newspapers out to 100 miles for 1 penny back in the day. And past 100 miles was 1.5 pennies, right? So they understood the importance of sharing the news. And what you guys talked about, in some of your literature was that you guys covered the fires, you covered mental health, you covered COVID, you covered a lot of things that may or not sexy, but you needed coverage. And a well-informed public is a happy public, right? And then that's the old Joseph Pulitzer stuff, is that our republic and its press will rise and fall together, right? Is that a piece of what the Latino Media Collaborative and the Media of Color, are they addressing that digital divide with a lot of the initiatives specific to getting stories out to the community so that the community understands what's happening, as opposed to, because there's a startling statistic that is running through my head, is that 70% of people are getting their news now from social media. And we know that social media itself is not news. It's memes and propaganda and opinion. But you guys and the organizations that you're talking about are genuine, old school, shoe leather reporting journalists. And I think it's fantastic. So is that a piece of the initiative, is to get it distributed to these?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question, Joey. I would say what I see is, to become sustainable, right, and especially for those kinds of media outlets, generally they've been print focused.
Yeah.
And if they had a website, now one of the goals of this program that we're talking about doing with Media in Color and Latino Media Collaborative is we get everybody on a what's called Newspack, which is the WordPress kind of core platform that all of us use. And it would be very hard for them to afford that in every case. And that has kind of all the built-in bells and whistles to make them have an effective website. So that's the first thing. That's the first step, is getting them all there. And then the second part is that effort to make them sustainable includes building the team that can deliver what you were just speaking about, can engage with the community, do local forums and public events and virtual events at this point in time, and engage a social media strategy, et cetera. And some of our nonprofit newsrooms are specifically using text delivery as their sole mechanism, some as their sole mechanism for outreach to their communities.
Okay, that's cool, because most people have phones.
Yeah. So that is very interesting. That's a kind of growing. There's a nonprofit called Il Tampano in Oakland that is all text. I mean, they have a website, but they're just starting to use the website, but they started with text as their goal, and that is what they're expanding most rapidly. And there are many others actually in the INN membership that are doing that across the country. So there are all sorts of models like that, but investing in the sort of engagement, social engagement, is an important part of the outreach, and that includes, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and new other ways like text only, for example. Right.
And you're still, so just so I hear you clearly, is that a lot of these smaller organizations are still print.
Especially among the ethnic media, that would be true. All of the other, of our 200 plus media partners, I mean, many of them are still, newspapers, right? But they all have digital sites. Right. But more of our ethnic media partners had either underdeveloped web presence or no web presence yet. And now, they're all kind of moving toward that so that they have more opportunity for reach, right? Because if you obviously have a digital presence, you can build all sorts of reach out of that.
Sure. And so they were actually still printing news on paper and having it delivered to doorsteps.
Yes, there's lots of them. There are lots of them in California. We still have quite a few newspapers. We have a lot fewer than we used to, right? But, many of our partners are still, have newsprint,
Yes. All right. No, that's good. Because that's something that I've been so wrapped up in digital for so long that I forget that there's, printed newspapers. Like I was a paper boy when I was 11. So I remember.
You remember that. And there's still paper boys. There's still people taking them and delivering exactly.
There is. I see them even here in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
So let me ask you this. This is a big question in the definitional space. You mentioned equity a couple of times. How do you guys at CalMatters define equity, and how do you work on that? Because it's a really big term that has numerous meanings. What does it mean for you guys?
Well, I guess I would define it first on the coverage level. I mean, what we are trying to cover is the California divide. And that divide is poverty and inequity at very high rates across our state. And we are trying to write about that in every way. And we're also tying that into the state's stated goal of re-engineering the economy to lift more Californians, right?
Yep.
So equity has to do with not just racial, social, economic, environmental justice, but those are important themes of the equity coverage overall. But it also just has to do with people being on a path to economic mobility that's sustainable for them.
Okay.
And so those are really important. Those are the themes that we really, we cover, right? And it's just that because this is a nation state, unlike many others, right, in the world's fifth largest economy, it's so big, right, that there's so many aspects that you have to be able to cover. And that's why, we say we are using an equity lens to look at all of these beats, environment, education, healthcare, all of these things that we cover. We use an equity lens because that is the state of our nation and our world right now. And we want to do that. So that's one way, is through covers. The second way is through our commentary. We have a statewide commentary forum. We also distribute all of that work to all of our media partners as well. And so we are, with the commentary, the equity lens kind of comes through when we look at perspectives on those issues and potential solutions. So we're looking for perspectives, broad array of perspectives across our state, including lived experience. Mm-hmm. And because we want the commentary forum to be a place where those perspectives are aired and viewed and listened, read, and where they have the potential for change to happen, right? That's not our role to change, but our role is to provide perspectives. And so that's what we do. And, in that way, we look at equity because we actually have goals against diverse perspectives, diverse in every way, age, creed, everything, right? Region. We are always looking. We don't want to have we only have all of Southern California, or we only have Northern California, or we only have people in this age range or this color, right? We need lots of perspectives, and we need, whether they're change makers, lawmakers, it doesn't matter, whether they're community people at a local level talking about the perspectives on those issues. So, it's a daunting challenge because it's a big state, but that's what we work toward all the time, is to have a healthy dialogue in that forum about solutions and perspectives on the issues of our day. I mean, I'd say those are probably our primary ways of taking that equity lens and sort of delivering on it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Because I think a big piece of what you're talking about, some of the literature I read from your site actually talked to, I think it's 40% of Californians live at a poverty or below poverty level. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the 40 million people that are all included, that's, it's 18 million people that are in trouble.
It's a huge amount.
That's a staggering gross statistic, considering we are the fifth largest, $3 trillion economy here in California.
Yep.
And so on that equity side of things is that you guys talk specifically for that, because that's again where I think the biggest problem remains, is that people in poverty don't have a lot of time to access literature that may help them, whether it's on voting, whether it's on their COVID health, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on, initiatives within their own local or state, specific to funding programs to help with their childcare, to help with food. How is it that we collectively can help more people have better information about what's available to them? And how can we do that as a journalistic organization?
Yeah, it's another really good question. I don't think any of us are that great at it, to be honest, yet. I don't. I think that there are definitely other news organizations that have done some really kind of remarkable, experimenting with some remarkable ways of engaging at that local lived experience level. I think CalMatters, we still are working on that. And one of the ideas we have that we're planning to do starting this year is to have regional teams that will include an engagement kind of editor who will just go do that, like figure out interesting ways to engage, right, with local people, so you can get kind of more of that lived experience and local voice and, ideas. And, just we need to like find a better pathway to that. That's, it's really humbling to try to do that in a state this big. And I don't know what the real answer is, but we're thinking that we could experiment in this way. Since we've had some regional teams, we'd be able to start learning how to do that better. That's one. I think, other things are like we did do something really interesting that we are about to put something up on the site about. We had one of our California Divide reporters did a set of kind of I don't know what you call it, I guess a training session for a group of homeless people that we have been writing about. And, we got them laptops and we did a whole training to tell their own stories. And then, we're using some of those stories on the site. And it's a small example. I think we had about 15 of them. And, we did it on either a phone, on Zoom, but on phones for many of them. And it was like a good learning experience because it brought the lived experience to us. It also gave them some new skill sets and helped them tell stories that we hadn't heard and that they could share through us, right? We could get those out there and they could share them themselves too. It's like a small example, but that's kind of what you need is like small learnings, right? That you can take one example like this and, okay, so could we do something bigger than that, right? And could we do it instead of here? Could we do it in, 3 other communities, et cetera? Again, you're never going to be able to scale that big enough in a state like California, but small examples, models that could turn into something bigger, that get you closer to engaging at that local level and with local voices could make a big difference.
And is that part of your digital democracy initiative? How does that cross-pollinate with what we're talking?
Yeah, that's another good question. So the digital democracy, so here's the thing with that. We learned a lot, starting in 2018 and then in 2020 with our voter guide. We have a voter guide. It's really cool. We did it.
It is the best voter guide ever, by the way. That's the one thing that I go to every time for you guys.
It's really, it is really good, right? And the reason is, the reason it's good, not just rah CalMatters, but the reason it's good is like, no one wants, voting is not really, you can't really consider that to be a fun experience. Voting,
no.
Right?
It's not a sexy thing.
Get those things in the mail if you're, and you just think I can't do this. Not to mention, California's propositions are impossible to understand. So
they really are.
But the point is we said, I didn't think of this at all. Our team kind of came together and we did our first voter guide in 2018. We're like, what would make this accessible for people? We decided to do job interviews. And it changed everything. We had, I think it was about 2.9 million people watched the 1-minute videos that we did, which explained the propositions in a way that a human being could actually understand, right? Yes. It's just, and then, we did videos with all the contestants, all the people running for governor, et cetera, and all our state offices. Yeah. It's just make it easy for people to understand, right? So they can go vote with confidence. It's so simple, but the point is it worked. We got millions of people. And that was all great. We also did it in different languages. We work with a group of Asian media organizations and a couple of others. And we translated into several languages. We actually raised money so that newspapers serving several Asian communities could add extra pages in their newspapers and put the voter guide in it in their language. I mean, again, this is not like rah-rah CalMatters. This should be like really basic,
right.
But it isn't, is the point. Like we had to go raise money in order to do that. And it helped. And, La Piñon and others came to us and said, people wrote us and said, like, this really helped me. Like, that's all that matters, actually, right? It's not rah-rah CalMatters. It's like, make something accessible and people can use it and make it like it's in a bodega near their house, right? It's in their little local paper, whatever it is. So just things like that. That's what it takes. And that's what this digital democracy thing was all about. And we learned a lot because we did it in several languages, et cetera. Now we're thinking right now, because we're about to make our new guide for the 2022. And we're thinking about like, okay, how can we improve on that? What can we do? We're even thinking about like making like prop and voting party kits that would be like literally physical, and like people could do it in their living rooms with their family or friends. People can have like little parties and, we just give them to everybody. We're thinking about more, okay, so could we print more and put them in churches across California? I mean, we're not going to do every church, right? But like what could we do to get it in the hands of people and make it more accessible and lower the barrier to voting? So that's the idea. And then the other idea that goes with this whole digital democracy thing is we've been working with Cal Poly, and they have a amazing team of data scientists. And what we've said to them is, no one can understand the impact of money on lawmakers and policymakers. No one really understands anything about it. Aren't there? And these guys have like AI tools, artificial intelligence tools they're able to like make these, kind of pretty accessible little maps and things that show you the influence of money. Who's contributing to X, Y, Z, right? And now we're talking about local lawmakers who are representing somewhere. So that's another thing that you can look at. We have a product called the Glass House on our site, which is our effort to create a way for anyone to find out who their local lawmaker is, what they do, what money's influencing them. And so now we're working with Cal Poly to put together their AI brain power to make this kind of information more accessible to people. So that's what this is really kind of lower the barrier to entry and understanding of basic things using tools that, most of us couldn't even understand. But once it's there, the data sitting in front of you, you go, oh, that map really makes me understand that. I didn't understand it at all, right? But now, poof, there it is in front of me. So that's the idea.
I love that. And you have in here that this is part of a goal, I think, is that for another $1 million a year, you could take your Cal Poly project manager, who's currently dedicated about 20% of the time,
right,
and put him full time, have software engineers, UI people, user interface people, project managers, student staff, video hosting. And the initiative is basically what you said. It's to bring a layperson, plain English approach to the complexity of voter copy, if you will. Because there's a comedian, I can't remember him or her name, but they were making fun of it in the sense that it was dropping the double negatives inside the voter. And they made a joke in the sense like, this one said, if you vote yes, you're going to kill babies. And he's like, but I don't want to kill babies. And if I want to make sure that I protect babies. But the way that they worded it, he was worried that he was actually going to kill babies if he voted yes on it.
Yes.
So that's kind of what you guys are trying to get to, right? Where you take all of this and make, to your point, a contestant, kind of bring some fun to it, and then bring a level of discourse that is acceptable and understandable by us regular folk that haven't really dove into all of the nuance of the politics and where it comes from and who's lobbying for what and why. And so that is a piece of what you guys are doing too then, which I think is fantastic. And then you have another initiative is the investigator reporting. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because that intrigued my ears quickly.
Sure. Yeah. What we call our accountability desk. Again, as CalMatters has evolved, we are always looking at like, where are the big gaps in what needs to be done? And what we decided is, again, we're in a nation state with a nearly $300 billion budget. It's startling, right? Where is all that money going, and is it effective? And does it, do what it's supposed to do?
Yeah.
We don't have the level of investigative reporting we used to have 20 years ago in California. Many newspapers had big teams. Many of our newspapers don't have that anymore. There is literally, it just doesn't exist. So,
right.
I would say, most of our team is very capable of doing in-depth investigative work, but we want to have a dedicated investigative team. We have one dedicated reporter. Everybody else does. We let them go off for a few months and do big projects all the time. But the idea is to build an accountability desk that will really be the watchdog for all of this money and where it's all going. That will take, a fair amount of money, and we're raising money now. So that's exciting. And we will have a dedicated team. We'll also include like a general assignment reporter who can fill in for a reporter on their beat, so that, if the economy reporter is doing a big thing on the EDD crises, and, no one can understand how all these people didn't get their money and got ripped off of unemployment, right? Like, no one can understand what happened. And we've been writing about it extensively, but there's still so much more to say. That reporter can go off and do that, and a general assignment reporter can fill in on that beat, so we don't lose our beat coverage during that time, because these investigations often take, months of effort. And we already have a data team, but we'll continue to grow that data team, because data is really at the heart of these investigative projects, and often takes, months to gather all the data. So the idea is to, build a dedicated team to kind of replace what's been lost in California. And then again, we give all our work away for free. So, hundreds of our news partners use our work. And that's the idea, is we'll be able to produce this kind of work and then get it out on our own site and distribute it to all of our media partners.
This is an initiative you're attempting to fund currently, right?
Yes. I mean, we have one dedicated accountability reporter now, and, our team continues to do lots of investigations all the time, but the idea is to build a full team, and we are fundraising for that right now.
That's great. And that's the one you have in your list. If you had your druthers, you would have up to 6 reporters,
right?
And advanced investigative data skills, an executive editor, a data analyst, a visual journalist, a deputy editor, research software consultants and training, paid student interns, which I highlighted, which I think is fantastic, and then legal consultation on sensitive stories. That's a great question. What does that mean? Legal representation on sensitive stories. What are you guys up against on that front?
So, every investigative story has to be reviewed by a lawyer who's got skills in that area. And we have a wonderful lawyer, a longtime media lawyer who was at the LA Times for years, and she's amazing. So, every step along the way, you run into issues related to gathering public records. You might have resistance from organizations, agencies, federal, state, any local. That could be one aspect. But then you're also, if you're putting together, the story of the failure of EDD to manage the unemployment and money crises, you have to be very careful to get your facts right, and to be sure that you have strong support for everything you're saying about the findings that you put together at the end of an investigation. So, we always work with our lawyer to review everything, and that the lawyer looks at everything that you've got, and, really, you have to make sure they're sound, right? And fully reported. So, obviously Dave does that with all of our stories anyway, but we also do it with our lawyers to just review. And it's great to have a legal set of eyes that's thinking at that level about the support that you have for making, for presenting your findings in the strongest possible way and with the right level of support.
Well, that's so cool. And you know what, Marsha, I wanted to get into stuff that I don't need to get into anymore. So I will just wrap it up this way. I will say this, is that and a lot of the homework we've done, and the books that I referenced in my last interview on this with a couple other folks, was Free the Press by Brian Karam. And he published that in 2021. And it's about journalism today and how it's problematic for a lot of reasons that we already know. And then there was one called The Death and Life of American Journalism that was written in 2010. And that was really more about the death of the newspaper business and how that affected old school journalism and how that worked. And then I mentioned Batya Anger-Sargon's new book called Bad News, which was a pretty scathing indictment on specifically the New York Times. They went after them pretty heartily, as well as the Post, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, for being elitist. And at the actual, that the tone had to change because to sell newspapers or to sell digital subscriptions, you needed to cater to what they called a moral panic. In this case, it was racism and how it's affected our culture, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion being a part of that. And what took place, which is, I love interviews like this, it's just what you did helped me, and it'll help our listeners understand that true journalism exists, that it's here, that it's actually growing, which is very good news. And that, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be journalists out there that are working for, clicks and stories and shares and media buy analysis and things that they have to do to make a living. But what is really encouraging for me, as someone who's really attempting to understand what's going on in journalism, you guys are doing it right. And it doesn't sound like CalMatters is the only one doing it right. It sounds like there's a slew of nonprofits that are attempting to actually tell real stories through a nonpartisan lens based on reporters who are dedicated and have a sacrosanct mission of being objective in their reporting.
Yes, I'm with you.
That makes me really happy.
It makes me happy too. I'll tell you what makes me really happy. This is my first year. I went in January as the chair of the board of the Institute for Nonprofit News. And the reason I love it is it's you can absolutely see in all of these news organizations this passion for public service journalism, for serving the needs of their communities. And this past year, 2021, we had our first awards for our nonprofit news organizations. And so I was happened to be one of the readers. And I mean, I know lots of these news organizations, but I don't know all 360 of them. And I was startled, humbled, and impressed by the kind of journalism they were practicing all over. And that just gives me, I've been in this industry 25 years plus, and it just gave me so much hope. And I see it every day. We've got 40 of them here, and these are all people I really care deeply about. And I see the work they do. And I just think, who else, right? It's really important journalism at a local level. And these are, some of the startup leaders of these organizations are, young, and some of them are old and they've been doing it for a long time, and their passion is the same, right? They're just out there trying to serve their communities. And, we've lost so many news organizations over the last decade in California and elsewhere, right? And many of the others that are left, the for-profit ones, right, are still struggling. And so to me, the fact that we can have so many nonprofits, and that we, CalMatters, can give our work to a whole bunch of for-profit and nonprofit, and that we are sharing our work now. We collaborate together with for-profit news organizations, big ones like the LA Times we've done collaborations with, small ones we've done collaborations with, and that we're not actually thinking of ourselves as competing anymore. It's really wonderful because it benefits the communities. That's really all that matters. The competition thing's kind of ridiculous anyway. Sure, we can compete for good stories, but we don't try to do the same stories everybody else is doing, because what's the point of that? Doesn't make sense, right? It just doesn't make sense. So,
and it's not pie. It's not pie. There's plenty for all of us. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So. There's so much still, not covered. But I'm very encouraged. I feel very encouraged by what I'm seeing, and I think that we all have to be better informed, right? For our world to be a better place. And especially this time, one really good thing about, nonprofits is we have to be nonpartisan because it's so if you're going to be, you check the box, it says nonpartisan. So you have to work really hard to stay that way. And we need more of that in our nation and really in our world at this point because we have such a division.
Well, yeah, and that's actually the real scary thing. And you mentioned this before, as you know, your industry, journalism in general, hasn't been great on the diversity front. And my industry, you know, coming from the ad business, it's the same thing. We haven't done a very good job of that. And I think that in general, the media, specific to the largest publishers and the largest news channels, and I understand this as a businessman, you know, they need to do what they need to do to make money. And so I get that. But the problem there, which is a big one now, is that we are so divided as a culture. Mm-hmm. And in part, it's due to the media and how they taint the stories and how they report on 10% of the problem. And because that's the sexiest part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. I get it. It's if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing. That's always said true. But if you're a left-leaning organization, you're going to print your purview. And if you're a right-leaning organization, you're going to print yours. And I think that the nonpartisan approach to what you guys are doing and that what the nonprofit sector in general is doing, I think the biggest thing as someone who tells stories for a living is that your stories need to be told more so that people then understand that there are sources out there like CalMatters that you can go to and read a story about COVID and say, okay, I get this. It's not being slanted one way or another. I can read a story about poverty and homelessness in California. I can read a story about welfare. I can read a story about schools. I can read a story about masks. And these are all really important stories to the average family, the average mom and dad that really need to understand, hey, what do I do with my kids? And do I need to upgrade the masks because they were saying I shouldn't before? And now should I because of Omicron? And what does that look like? And where do I go to get these pieces? And I think that's, for me, why I have so much respect for journalism and journalists in general, is that historically, and my friend Alex and you being two prime examples, is that you guys care about reporting a story and you have it fact checked and you send that up to your editor. And that's actually where the name came from of my company, is True 30. That came from Alex, right? Having the 30 at the bottom of the story.
I know, I remember. I loved that.
Send up to your editor. Yeah. And so, I mean, we're going to try and do that. I don't want to misrepresent what True 30 is. I have journalists and writers. We are talking about the most popular stories of the day. So we're, you know, as you've probably looked at our stories this week, we talked about masks. We talked about the Joe Rogan stuff. We talked about Ben Shapiro's media empire and how it's going to help the GOP win in 2022, which scares me. But, you know, we are attempting nonpartisan, believe it or not, because even someone who leans left, I have so many dear friends on the right, including my relatives, who always ask me for years and years and years, you're in the media, Joey, where should I go? Where should I go to get a good story? And that's one thing now that, you know, I've said this over the last couple of years to people, but if you really want good state news, go to CalMatters. You know, my friends in Minnesota don't really, it's not their thing, but like my friends here, and they have come back and said, this is really cool. It's not the sexy stuff, you know, that you see on Fox News or MSNBC. But it's the stuff that we need to understand as a community to make better decisions and to vote. And it doesn't mean vote one way or another. It means to vote on what matters to you and how important those issues may be. So, you know, I know you got to get going, but thank you so much for your time and your effort with me. And then thank you for all that you guys are doing at CalMatters, because I genuinely believe, as someone who reveres journalism, that it's necessary for our democracy. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing over there.
Thank you, Joe. It's been so fun to talk to you about these things. I think we're both pretty passionate about it. So it's great to be able to illuminate a little bit of what's happening in this space. And, you know, we have to be optimistic about these trends, right? Because the country really, really needs to lessen these divides that we face. You know, it's just everywhere now. And I just feel like, you know, good information that isn't taking sides is maybe can help heal some of those rifts that we have right now.
I couldn't agree more. It's a good place to end it. Thank you. Let me shut the recording off.
Take good care.